Greetings, Professor McKee here with our third seminar Saturdays for fall 2025. Today, this week, we're going to be covering paternity leave and its effect on the fertility rate. So the paper in question is called Does Paternity Leave Reduce Fertility? By Lidia, Farre, and Libertad, Gonzalez. My apologies if I made a mistake on those names. And this paper was published in the Journal of Public Economics in 2019. So it is not a working paper that was presented at a top conference. It's a published paper. And I'm not super familiar with the economics journals, but from what I can tell, it appears to be a good field journal. So not one of the top, very best journals out there, but still a pretty good journal. And the reason I'm doing this, well, a friend of mine sent me this paper. And it's an interesting topic. And despite it being more general economics, employee benefits, well, I teach a class on employee benefits, so that's kind of something that's interesting. And there is some relevance to the fertility rate with finance, because the finances of many governments are being affected by it, or at least are projected to be affected by it, although for most of them, they're already being harmed by this. So a lot of governments have pension plans, healthcare plans that provide benefits for the retirees. The United States has Social Security and Medicare. And the way these programs are financed, you tax the people who are working, younger generations and the generation that is retired, to pay for it. And if you have shrinking younger generations because you have a low because your fertility rate's going down, then your ability to tax people to pay for those promised benefits that you've promised for people who are in retirement or about to retire is going to be stressed. And I'm most familiar with the United States, but like Social Security, Medicare, they are going to have problems paying the currently promised benefits. And we're either going to have to reduce benefits or raise taxes, or probably most likely some sort of combination of that in order to keep the programs alive. I highly doubt that it would be politically feasible for us to just remove those programs. They're not going away. But this is a financial problem that many other Western countries are facing, because all of them have had declines in their fertility rate. Now, for the empirical setting for this paper, they are focused on Spain. Since 1999, Spain had 6 weeks of paid maternity leave, but only 2 days of paid paternity leave. So the moms get 6 weeks off from work that the company has to pay them, but the dads only have 2 days. And there's also 10 weeks of paid leave that the parents can divide between themselves in whatever proportion they want. And they also had legal rights to much longer lengths of time, but it's unpaid leave, not paid leave. In practice, the moms were taking the paid leave and using it in pretty high percentages, but the dads were basically never taking paid leave. In 2007, the Spanish government increased the legal amount that the companies had to give from 2 days to 13 days, so it's an increase of 11, a little bit over 2 weeks of working, assuming 5 work days in that week. So new fathers became eligible starting from birth that were on March 24th, 2007. That's the day the law was passed. And as we'll see in the next slide, about half of the fathers started taking advantage of it by the next year, 2008. Since this only started mid-year 2007, obviously, you're not going to see full participation from fathers until the next year. But there is a very noticeable increase, going from basically 0 up to a little bit under 40% of the fathers, and then we jump again to something a little bit above 50%. So there's a very huge increase in fathers using paternity leave starting in 2007. And a nice thing for the authors here, which is probably one of the reasons they're showing this slide. I mean, one is there's a huge increase here, so very clearly we are seeing a big increase in paternity leave, but also maternity leave doesn't really change. It's pretty stable at probably about 70-something%, maybe a little bit less than 70%. And the amount of the fathers using that generic paid paternity leave is staying unchanged. Like, that's not changing. So all the other parental leave, none of those things seem to change much around 2007. It's only the father's leave, which is good if we're trying to isolate and look only at the effect of this increase here. We don't want to have other things contaminating it. And the econometrics that they're using is a regression discontinuity, because we can look at parents who had a baby born just after March 24th. So baby is born March 26th, and we compare those parents with the parents who had their baby born March 22nd. They're just a few days apart, but there's this parental leave difference. The ones that were born after March 24th get the extra paternity leave. A large proportion of these fathers are going to take advantage of it. The ones who had their baby born earlier in the year, they don't get the paternity leave. And this is a very useful design if you can find it, because both groups of parents here are going to experience all sorts of larger trends together. And so those things are going to be controlled for. For instance, there's a recession the next year from the financial crisis. There was a recession in the US, there's a recession in Europe too. And both of these parents are going to experience a recession. So to the extent that would affect the parents having fewer children, well, it's going to affect both the treated and the control group. And another nice thing about this is it's very unlikely that parents would know exactly when they need to conceive the baby, roughly 9 months before March 24th. While the legislation is being considered, you're not going to know the exact day the legislation is going to go into effect, because that's the day the legislation actually passed. You might be able to guess that a couple of weeks or a month ahead, but 9 months before, that this is the exact day we're going to get the right votes and we're going to get it through. No, not going to happen. And it's not particularly easy to force babies to come early or late. I wouldn't really recommend trying to get your wife to wait an extra week to give birth, so you get 2 extra weeks of paternity leave. I'm sure she'd appreciate you helping out around the house those 2 weeks, but the baby's going to come. The baby's going to come, and you don't have a lot of control over it. Now, it's possible that people might have, say, rescheduled their C-section or something, because that will basically have the baby come on schedule. And so they check to see, well, right around the birth date, do we see a big clumping? So are there a lot of people getting born after, and a lot fewer people than we'd expect getting born before? And we're not really seeing that. There's actually a kind of a drop here. Like the day or two after, there's like fewer births for some reason. But there's definitely not a decrease in births among the control group. And there's not really any noticeable shifts towards the amount right over there. It's kind of interesting to see how kind of volatile the number of births per day or per week is throughout the year, throughout several months. And some further confirmation, even if there's no birth clumping, we are still assuming that the treated and control groups are extremely similar. I mean, they should be, because when exactly your baby is born in the spring isn't really, why would people be different there? But it's impossible to rule everything out, but they do check a lot of sort of demographics for the father and mother to see is there a difference here. So weeks of gestation, if the baby was born premature, if the baby had a birth weight, maybe a low birth weight, there's mortality within the 24 hours, unfortunately. The gender of the baby, how old the mom was, education, working, citizenship status, same thing for the father. They have a bunch of other additional control variables that are on a second part of this appendix table. And there's a few differences that show up, especially when you are expanding the window between basically almost 3 months after and 3 months before. But we're testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, there's not like 5 or 6 more in the next table, times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're testing probably close to 100 different runs here. And just by pure chance, we would expect something like 5 or 6 of these to show up with statistical significance. Again, if the 95% sort of confidence interval, just by pure chance, 5% of the time we're going to see statistical significance. If you run 100 tests, you will probably find something. And so they find a few differences, but nothing super, like there's not a lot more than just like 4 or 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, looks like just 4. So there doesn't seem to be much of a difference in demographics between the parents who are treated versus the parents who are controlled. And they do show graphically a couple things like the age of the mother, basically the same. The number of children that were born with low birth weight, again, basically the same. And that's just a visual check. Again, they had actual statistics here for the age of the mother and the birth weight. Okay, so in terms of where they get the data, there's nothing super interesting in terms of for finance here. They get a lot of government data from Spain to get the exact birthdays, to get the baby and parent characteristics. They also are using some surveys of representative samples to get national statistics on some possible reasons for why what they find with fertility rate happened. These are all very Spanish specific sources, so I have basically no knowledge of them, and they're not finance either. So again, I have no knowledge of them. So what are they looking at? They look at the number of days until the next birth, conditioned on that couple having another baby, or that mother having another baby. And then also the probability that the mother will have another baby within the next 2, 4, or 6 years after that baby in the 2007 March, around that March window. They also look at what happened with employment and earnings, unpaid leave, part-time work, shortly after that baby was born, the 2007 baby. So, number of days that they take to have their next baby. And this is, of course, conditioned on them actually having another baby. We'll get to that potential bias in just a minute. So the length of time for the treated couple, mother really, goes up. Looks like that's an increase of about 27 if you're using the statistical optimal bandwidth, ranging from 16 to 32, 38 if you're spreading the window to different amounts. It seems to be driven more by the older mothers that were over 30, as opposed to the mothers that were in their 20s. Or I guess 30 as well. But and this is a pretty small effect. So this is basically 1 month. Now, because only half of the fathers are actually taking the paid leave, it would actually double the effect. So if we see 16 days, it's really 16 times 2. So potentially 2 months longer for having that next baby. And it seems to be stronger for the older mothers as opposed to the younger ones. Okay, so there is survivorship bias here, right? If you were paying attention, I already mentioned that the sample that they were just looking at was limited to mothers who had another baby within the next 6 years. But what about the mothers who never had another baby or waited longer than 6 years? If the paternity leave also changed the probability of having another baby at all, it could completely change our conclusion. Because right now we're saying, well, it looks like they delay having the kids by about a couple months. But if treated mothers are less likely to just have another baby at all, well, that makes our conclusion even stronger. There's an even larger negative effect on the fertility rate for people in Spain. But if the treated mothers were more likely to have another baby, but it was delayed, that would push against that delay, reducing the fertility rate. Because now our pool of people who are actually going to have a baby has increased, so there's more babies, which is going to make our fertility rate higher, of course. So what is the probability of having another baby? Well, that goes down to. Okay, so again, they're doing different ranges here. So this is the optimal bandwidth based on a statistical test. This is 7 days after the cutoff, 7 days before, and so on. And the probability of having another child within 2, 4, or 6 years is going down. For 2 years, it goes down. For 4 years, it goes down. For 6 years, although it's a little bit weak for 6 years. So the probability seems to be going down. I will note that that's not super robust statistically. A lot of these are either insignificant or like 10% statistical significance, but it's always negative. It's always negative. It never goes positive. So with not super high confidence, but some confidence, we can say, yeah, the probability seems to be going down a little bit. Again, you would double the effect here, I think, because only half of the parents are actually being treated, and they're being mixed together with the other half that did actually take advantage of the paternity leave. So when they then look at older mothers, and the authors say it's stronger for the older mothers. In the very narrow bandwidth, it doesn't seem to do anything, but you do see stronger statistical significance for the older mothers and nothing really going on for the younger mothers when you have longer time windows. Of course, it's easier to find things with these longer time windows because we have a lot more parents in the sample. There's a lot more parents having a baby within 56 days than there is 7 days. So again, they think it's the older mothers that is driving the reduction and having no children at all. Okay, so mothers that have another baby seem to have it a little bit later if the father received the extra 2 weeks of paternity leave. And mothers are more likely to not have another baby, again, if the father received that 2 weeks of paternity leave. I'd say there's definitely no evidence that this increases the fertility rate. We increased leave and fertility definitely didn't go up. It probably went down, but I would be a little cautious in directly concluding that because the statistical significance is not super strong. And if it did go down, it went down by a pretty small amount, which shouldn't be super surprised by because the effect of 10 extra days or 11 extra days of paternity leave is probably not going to be super large. But assuming that we are correct in our belief that fertility rate is going down, why is this happening? Why are the treated couples, mothers, having fewer babies or delaying their next baby? Is there economic reasons in the labor market that are affecting the mother or father? Maybe the father's employment's being affected negatively because they're taking off extra days from work, or there's some longer term shift in how much the father's working. Does the mother's entering the workforce or re-entering change because of this? Is there a different division in labor with childcare that changes their ability or desire to have more children? Does the divorce rate change? It's harder to have a baby if your husband divorces you or you divorce your husband, after all. And they're looking at all those things. So the first thing they look at is the labor market outcomes. And these are the actual results for the parents that were in this window. So after 3 months, after 6 months, or after 9 months, and they have government data that lets them see, like, I assume they're using things like tax return data. And fathers, nothing seems to change. They're working at the same rates. They're using leave. Well, they're not using leave, basically. But there's no difference in their use of leave, if they're part-time, how much money they're making. There is no statistical difference between the treated fathers and the control fathers. There are differences in the mothers. They are more likely to be employed in relatively short term, within the next 6 months, if the father had paternity leave. They are less likely to be on leave, which, I mean, if you're more likely to be working, then of course you're less likely to be on leave. There's nothing really going on with part-time employment, but of course their earnings, because they're working, are going to be higher. So it seems like mom goes back to work for the treated couples, if the father had paternity leave. And this is pretty, like the statistical significance here is pretty strong. I mean, it's not a huge effect. These coefficients are not super large, but of course our original effect on fertility was pretty small too. So mothers are seeming to return endurance very strong in terms of statistical significance. And the authors didn't really give much of a hypothesis here. I mean, I had one when I first saw this was hey, you're having the father help you out those first 2 weeks. Since dad is home on paid leave, you're going to recover from the labor and pregnancy easier. And if you're recovering faster, then you're able to go enter the labor market faster. And then, of course, if you're working, well, you're busy working, you'll have less time and potentially interest for having a second baby, which would result in you delaying having the next baby or not having a baby at all. So I think the labor market channel, which is when mom goes back to work and then with mom and dad both working, they're less likely to have another baby, is the strongest sort of potential channel that the authors find. The next one is division of labor. The authors kind of push this one quite a bit in the paper. I'm really skeptical, and I will talk about my skepticism. All right, so first of all, note the tiny sample sizes here. They are now taking a longitudinal survey from 2009, 2010, and they're keeping the people who reported having a baby before and after this window. Now, I am not really skeptical that people would forget the day, the month that their kid was born in, but we have really small sample sizes here. There's a lot of the people that were in the treated and control groups that have disappeared now, and it's only people that are in this sample now. I assume hopefully that the survey data was done well and it's a representative sample, but it's still a pretty small sample. Now, the other thing that I have a big issue with is the survey asks the parents how many minutes they spend on childcare, housework, work, and then the residual, which is basically going to be leisure. And this is us looking back several years after the baby was born, because this was done in 2009, 2010, the baby was born in 2007. I don't trust these numbers at all. I can maybe trust the numbers for work, because employers keep track of how long you're spending time at work. If someone asked me how many minutes are you spending per day on work, I'd be like, okay, well, I come to work on average this many hours, so then I translate that to minutes, and I kind of know how much time I spend on work, but I do not track how much time I spend on housework. I do not track how much time I spend on childcare. I'm not even sure what the real difference is between the two. And I am extremely doubtful that the several hundred people that were being asked about this were also keeping careful track of how many minutes they spend on childcare and housework. I think there are probably massive amounts of noise and people just not remembering, because who keeps track of that? I sure don't. I don't think anyone would. So they do find there's a small, there seems to be an increase in childcare by the father. There's a decrease. Mothers are reporting a decrease. A lot of times it's not statistically significant, but sometimes it is. So the authors go, okay, well, the mothers are spending less time on childcare, and the fathers are spending more time on childcare. They also have age ranges, right? So this is this second part is the older couples, and this is the younger couples. Well, this is all of them versus just the older. And so they are finding that mother time on childcare goes down, father time on childcare goes up. And then their story is, well, the fathers didn't like the childcare, and it decreased their desired fertility for the overall couple. And indeed, reported desired fertility for adult men in Spain did decline from 2001 to 2006 compared to 2011, but they can't see the desired fertility for just those who had the extra childcare time, even though I really doubt it really that in those numbers, they see it for everyone. And there was a significant economic shock in between 2006 and 2011 that would probably reduce desired fertility for everybody. People tend to desire children less when they're unemployed. There was a pretty high unemployment rate in Spain. And there's all sorts of other things that could have happened in those 5 years that weren't the paternity leave went up by 2 weeks. So I'm really skeptical that we know with any confidence that the desired fertility actually went down for the treated fathers. Okay, so this is the second channel that the authors sort of support in their paper, and I do not agree. I really don't think they have much evidence in support of this. I think the employment channel looks much stronger than this. And then they also look at divorces, but there's not really any difference going on here with divorces. So it seems like the treated group maybe has a reduction in divorces in 2009, but then it goes away. And it's only 2009, not in 2008, the year closest to the actual treatment here. So they basically dismiss this channel. I am inclined to agree with them, because if it actually reduced the divorce rate because the father is helping out more with childcare, shouldn't it matter for 2008 as well as 2009? And why does it just disappear after 2009? Like, it's really strange that it only works for 1 year. All right, so conclusion. What they actually find is a pretty small effect. The babies are being delayed by a couple of months. There's a small percentage decrease in probability that mom has another baby at all. So a small decrease in fertility, probably, maybe. And the most likely reason for that is that mothers are entering the workforce sooner. I don't agree. I don't really buy the childcare differences because I don't trust the survey data there. It's not, and I just don't, and I don't believe at all that we have evidence showing us either way that desired fertility changed, because we don't actually measure it. There's certainly no evidence that paternity leave increased fertility, and it's possible that it slightly decreased it, which is I think an interesting result, because a lot of times when you see people talking about how do we increase fertility, one of the things that comes up is, well, we need to give parents more parental leave. Well, Spain did that. It definitely didn't increase fertility. It might have actually been counterproductive. I mean, I doubt Spain was doing this specifically to increase fertility. There are plenty of other reasons you might want to change the amount of employee benefits you give for paternity or maternity leave. But if you're doing it because you want to increase fertility, this is a paper that you don't want to see because it doesn't seem like it works. Now, again, this is one natural experiment, but the authors did mention that there were some papers about an increase in paternity leave in Norway that found a null result. Although, again, if you're hoping to increase fertility, this is not the kind of paper you want to see. So based on a pretty limited sample here of just this paper and the author's citation of some previous paper, of at least one, they cite several papers actually, that are all probably using the same setting for Norway, it doesn't look like if you increase paternity leave, it's going to do anything for fertility, at least certainly not in terms of increasing it. All right, so that is everything for this paper. And we'll have another fertility paper coming up in the next few weeks, but we'll be back to a sort of a much more standard finance paper next week. So hope you enjoyed. If you did, please comment, like, and or subscribe so that others can find this video too. And if you know about papers that found an actual strong, very robust effect for fertility, I'm very interested in that, because well, it's an interesting topic, even if it's not specifically finance.